He thought it was just another stop, but this night was already watching him. The street was nearly empty, just past midnight, with a faint chill hanging in the air and a single flickering streetlight casting long shadows across the pavement as Officer Daniel Brooks pulled his cruiser to a slow stop, the red and blue lights washing over everything in sharp pulses, turning silence into tension. He stepped out with the confidence of someone who believed he controlled the moment. His boots echoing against the asphalt as his eyes locked onto a woman standing alone near the corner. Ava Carter didn't move, didn't step back, didn't raise her voice. She simply stood there, calm in a way that didn't match the situation, and that alone was enough to unsettle him. "You got a reason to be out here this late?" he asked, his tone already carrying judgment before she could even respond. She met his gaze, steady, unreadable, the kind of look that didn't beg for approval or fear authority. And for a brief second, something shifted, something small but noticeable, like a crack in the rhythm he was used to, but he ignored it, brushing it off as attitude, stepping closer, demanding identification, his voice sharper now, filling the quiet street as if volume alone made him right. Ava reached slowly into her bag, every movement controlled, deliberate, as if she understood something he didn't, something just beyond his awareness, and when she handed over her ID, he barely glanced at it before scoffing, already convinced he knew the story, already writing it in his head. "Figures," he muttered under his breath, circling her slightly, the hum of his radio crackling faintly in the background, but he paid it no mind because in his world, nothing unexpected ever happened, not really, not to him, not on a quiet street like this. And yet there was something in the air, something in the stillness that didn't feel empty, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Ava remained silent, her posture straight, her eyes calm, not defiant, not submissive, just present. And that silence stretched longer than it should have, pressing against the edges of the moment, making it heavier, thicker. Until even Brooks felt it, though he couldn't name it, couldn't explain why this felt different from every other stop he'd made. He tightened his grip on the situation, raising his voice slightly, asserting control the only way he knew how. But what he didn't realize, what he couldn't see, was that this wasn't just a stop. It wasn't just another name, another face, another moment to pass through and forget. Because somewhere beyond the reach of his flashing lights, unseen eyes were already watching, quiet engines waiting, and a truth far bigger than him was already moving into place. And the longer he spoke, the deeper he stepped into something he would not be able to walk back from. The silence did not break, it stretched, pulling tighter with every passing second until even the faint hum of the patrol car sounded louder than it should have. Officer Daniel Brooks shifted his weight, impatience creeping into his voice as he looked down at the identification again, this time longer, slower, as if forcing it to match the version of the story he had already decided was true. "Ava Carter," he read aloud, his tone flat, unimpressed. He glanced up, expecting a reaction, but she gave him none, no explanation, no apology, not even frustration, just that same steady gaze that refused to bend, and that unsettled him more than anything else, because he was used to responses, to nervous energy, to people trying to prove themselves. But she did not try, she did not rush, she simply existed in the moment like she knew something he did not. Brooks exhaled sharply, waving the identification slightly as if that alone gave him control. "You live around here?" he asked, though it was not really a question, more like a test, a trap waiting for her to answer wrong. Ava tilted her head just slightly, her voice calm and even when she finally spoke. "Is that relevant to why you stopped me, officer?" The words were simple, respectful even, but they landed differently. They slowed the rhythm, shifted the balance in a way Brooks did not like. His jaw tightened, and for a moment he hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but enough to feel it, enough to know that something about this interaction was slipping outside his usual control. He stepped closer again, closing the distance, trying to re-establish authority. "I am asking the questions," he replied, sharper now. But beneath that sharpness there was something else, something quieter, a flicker of uncertainty he refused to acknowledge. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, a burst of static followed by a voice trying to break through, but it was distorted, unclear. He reached up and adjusted it without really listening, brushing it off as interference. The kind that happen all the time, nothing worth attention, not tonight, not in this moment. Ava's eyes flickered briefly toward the radio, just for a second, then back to him, and that small movement, that almost invisible shift, carried more meaning than any words could have, but Brooks missed it, or chose to. Because accepting it would mean admitting that he was not fully in control of what was happening here. The street remained empty, no passing cars, no witnesses, just the two of them under that flickering light, and yet the air felt crowded, thick with something unseen, as if the space around them was no longer as isolated as it appeared. Brooks handed the identification back with a slight shake of his head, dismissive, but his movements were no longer as confident as before. "You match a description," he said, the explanation coming out almost automatically, something he had used before, something that usually ended the conversation in his favor, but this time, it sounded thinner, less certain. Ava took the identification without looking down, her fingers steady, her posture unchanged. "A description of what?" she asked quietly, and that question lingered, heavier than expected, because it was not just a question, it was a mirror, reflecting the moment back at him, forcing him to confront the gap between what he believed and what he could actually justify. Brooks opened his mouth to respond, but for the first time, the words did not come as easily, and in that brief pause, that single crack in his certainty, something shifted, something irreversible, because somewhere just beyond the edge of that quiet street, engines were beginning to move, doors were preparing to open, and a reality he had not accounted for was already closing in, silent, precise, and impossible to stop. The question did not fade, it stayed there between them, heavy and exposed, and for the first time that night Officer Daniel Brooks felt the weight of his own words pressing back against him, not enough to stop him, but enough to slow him down, enough to make him aware that this was no longer moving the way it usually did. He cleared his throat, shifting his stance as if resetting the moment. "Suspicious activity," he said, the phrase sounding rehearsed, distant, like something pulled from memory rather than truth. Ava did not react to the label, did not challenge it directly, she simply let it exist in the air, unconfirmed, unanswered, and somehow that made it weaker. Brooks glanced down the street, expecting movement, expecting something normal to break the tension, but nothing came, just the steady flicker of the street light and the low hum of his engine idling behind him, and then the radio crackled again. Louder this time, sharper, the static cutting through the quiet like a warning he could not quite understand. He pressed the button, irritation edging into his voice. "Dispatch, repeat that." But the response came fragmented, pieces of words slipping through. "Unit, confirm location, Stan." Then silence, incomplete, unresolved. He frowned, tapping the radio as if the problem was mechanical, as if it could be fixed with pressure instead of attention. Ava watched him, not with curiosity, not with fear, but with something closer to patience, like someone waiting for a moment they already knew was coming. Brooks noticed the look, and it unsettled him again. That same quiet certainty, that same absence of urgency, it did not match the situation, it did not match the power dynamic he believed he held, and yet it was there, steady and unshaken. "You think this is funny?" he asked, a slight edge creeping into his tone, trying to provoke something, anything that would return the interaction to familiar ground. Ava shook her head slowly, her voice calm, measured. "No, officer, I think this is important." And those words landed differently, not confrontational, not defensive, but precise, intentional, like they carried weight beyond the moment. Brooks exhaled through his nose, frustration building, because the more she spoke, the less control he felt, and control was everything. He took a step back, creating space, as if distance would restore balance, his hand resting near his belt, not out of necessity but out of habit. Out of the need to remind himself of his position, his authority. "You are being detained until I figure this out," he said, more firmly now, as if saying it made it true, as if it anchored the moment back to him. Ava did not resist, did not argue, she simply nodded once, a small movement that carried an unexpected calm, and that calm spread into the silence that followed, stretching longer than it should have, until even Brooks felt it pressing against him, and then, in the distance, something changed, faint at first, barely noticeable. A low vibration carried through the air. Engines, more than one, approaching steadily, not fast, not aggressive, but deliberate, controlled. Brooks turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing as he tried to place the sound. The street ahead still empty but no longer quiet, the night no longer still. Ava did not look, did not turn, she remained exactly where she was, as if the sound meant nothing to her, or everything, and that was the moment. The exact moment when the balance shifted completely, when the illusion of isolation broke apart, when the space that once felt empty revealed itself to be something else entirely, something observed, something contained, something that had been unfolding long before he ever stepped out of his car. And as the distant headlights began to appear, cutting through the darkness in a slow, steady line, one thought pressed into Brooks's mind, sharp and undeniable: this was never just a stop. The headlights grew brighter, stretching across the pavement until the quiet street was no longer quiet at all, engines humming in a slow, controlled approach that did not match urgency but intention. Officer Daniel Brooks turned fully now, his body angling toward the incoming vehicles, his confidence flickering as unfamiliar silhouettes emerged from the darkness. Dark SUVs, unmarked, clean, deliberate. They did not rush, they did not hesitate. They arrived like they already knew exactly where to be. Brooks felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, not yet, but recognition that something had shifted beyond his reach. His hand hovered near his radio again, pressing the button harder this time. "Dispatch, I have multiple vehicles approaching, identify units." His voice sharper now, searching for confirmation, for control, but the response came clear for the first time, and it was not what he expected. The voice on the other end calm, steady. "Unit 27, stand down and remain where you are." Brooks froze, the words landing heavier than they should have. Stand down was not a suggestion, it was an order, and it did not come with explanation. He looked back at Ava instinctively, as if searching for something in her expression that could make sense of it, but she had not moved. Not an inch, her posture still composed, her gaze steady. And now there was something else there, something unmistakable, not defiance, not fear, but certainty, the kind that did not need to prove itself. The vehicles came to a stop one by one, doors opening in a synchronized rhythm, figures stepping out with quiet authority, no raised voices, no sudden movements, just presence, controlled and absolute. Brooks straightened instinctively, his training pulling him upright even as uncertainty pressed in. "What is this?" he called out, his voice carrying but lacking the command it had moments before. One of the agents stepped forward, dressed in a dark suit, movements precise, eyes focused, and for a brief second, the entire scene seemed to pause, as if waiting for something unspoken to unfold. The agent's gaze shifted past Brooks, landing directly on Ava, and in that moment, the dynamic changed completely, not gradually, not subtly, but all at once. "Ma'am," the agent said, his tone respectful, controlled. "We are ready." Brooks blinked, the word hitting him before the meaning did. Ma'am, not suspect, not subject, not anything he had assumed, just one word, simple, but enough to fracture everything he thought he understood. Ava finally moved, a small step forward, unhurried, unshaken, her eyes never leaving Brooks as she reached into her coat, not quickly, not dramatically, just with quiet precision, and when she spoke, her voice carried a calm that filled the space more completely than any command ever could. "Officer Brooks," she said, and hearing his name from her lips sent a sharp ripple through him. "This stop is now part of a federal internal review." The words settled over the scene like a weight, undeniable, inescapable. Brooks felt the ground shift beneath his certainty, every decision, every word, every assumption replaying in his mind all at once, and for the first time that night, he understood something he could not undo. This was never about control, it was never about a routine stop, because while he thought he was observing, questioning, deciding, the truth was far simpler and far more unsettling. He had been the one under observation the entire time. The words did not echo, they settled, heavy and precise, wrapping around the moment until there was no space left for denial. Officer Daniel Brooks stood still, his posture rigid but no longer confident, his eyes shifting between Ava and the agents now surrounding the scene with quiet control, not a single raised voice, not a single rushed movement, and somehow that made it more powerful, more final, because this was not chaos. This was order, the kind that did not need to prove itself. Brooks swallowed, his voice catching slightly before he forced it steady. "There has to be some mistake," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, they felt thin, unsupported, like something he no longer fully believed. Ava took another step forward, closing the distance just enough for her presence to feel undeniable, her expression unchanged, calm, composed, but now unmistakably authoritative. "There is no mistake," she replied, her tone even, not raised, not aggressive, just certain, and that certainty carried more weight than any accusation ever could. One of the agents beside her opened a small folder, the sound of paper shifting in the quiet night cutting through the last fragments of Brooks's control. "Officer Daniel Brooks," the agent said clearly, reading with measured precision. "This interaction has been recorded and logged as part of an ongoing internal affairs investigation regarding conduct during civilian stops." Each word landed carefully, building a structure that Brooks could not interrupt, could not redirect. He felt his chest tighten as pieces of the night rearranged themselves in his mind. Every question he asked, every assumption he made, every tone he used. Now no longer private, no longer fleeting, but documented, observed, evaluated. Ava watched him closely, not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with something quieter, something deeper, like someone who had seen this pattern before, too many times to count. "You were given multiple opportunities to handle this stop appropriately," she continued, her voice steady. "And every decision you made tonight will be reviewed." Brooks opened his mouth again, searching for something, an explanation, a defense, anything that could shift the weight pressing down on him. But the words would not come, because for the first time, he was not the one controlling the narrative, he was inside it, subject to it, defined by it. The agents moved with quiet efficiency, one stepping toward the patrol car, another positioning themselves near the street, not aggressive, not confrontational, just present. Ensuring that everything unfolded exactly as it was meant to. Brooks lowered his gaze briefly, the flashing lights from his own vehicle reflecting off the pavement, the same lights that once made him feel in control now casting everything in sharp clarity, exposing rather than protecting. Ava reached into her coat once more, this time removing a badge, holding it up just long enough for it to catch the light, the gold surface reflecting back at him with unmistakable authority. "Chief Ava Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Internal Affairs Division," she said, the words simple, direct, final, and in that moment, the entire night aligned into a single, undeniable truth. Brooks was no longer the one asking questions, no longer the one deciding what happened next, because the power he thought he carried had never truly been his to control, and now, standing under the same flickering streetlight where he once felt certain, he understood something far more lasting. Authority without accountability is not power, it is exposure waiting for the right moment to be seen. The badge did not just reflect light, it reflected consequence, and as the glow faded, the reality it carried remained, steady and unavoidable. Officer Daniel Brooks felt the shift settle fully into place, not sudden anymore, not shocking, but heavy, like something that had always been there waiting to be seen. His shoulders lowered slightly, the rigid confidence that once held him upright now replaced with something quieter, something uncertain. He glanced around at the agents, their positions unchanged, their focus steady, no one rushing, no one escalating, because there was no need, the moment had already turned. "What happens now?" he asked, the question coming out slower than he intended, stripped of authority, carrying something closer to recognition. Ava Carter studied him for a brief second, her expression unreadable but not unkind, just measured, as if weighing not just his words, but everything that had led to them. "No," she said calmly. "The process you believed you controlled applies to you." The words were not sharp, not delivered with force, but they carried a clarity that cut deeper than confrontation ever could. One of the agents stepped forward slightly, holding a small device, its screen faintly illuminated. "All audio and visual records from this interaction have been secured," the agent stated, voice even, procedural. "This includes body camera, vehicle system logs, and independent surveillance units. Brooks's eyes flickered briefly toward his patrol car, the same vehicle that once symbolized his authority now standing as silent evidence, its presence no longer protective but revealing. He exhaled slowly, the weight of that realization settling deeper. Ava continued, her tone steady. This is not about a single moment, Officer Brooks. It is about patterns, about decisions made when you believe no one is watching. She paused just long enough for the words to settle. Tonight you were not alone. The street, once empty, now felt defined by that truth, every shadow, every silence, every second reframed as part of something larger, something deliberate. Brooks looked down briefly, his reflection faint in the polished surface of his car door, distorted by the flashing lights, and for a moment, he seemed to see himself differently, not as the one directing the scene, but as someone within it, accountable to it. I was doing my job, he said, quieter now, not defensive, not certain, just searching. Ava nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without agreeing to it. That is exactly what will be examined, she replied, her voice neither dismissive nor reassuring, just factual. The agents began to move with quiet coordination, one documenting the scene, another speaking softly into a communication device, their actions efficient but not hurried, reinforcing the sense that this was not chaos, not reaction, but structure. Brooks remained still, no longer trying to reclaim control, no longer searching for immediate answers, because the moment for that had passed, replaced by something slower, something that would unfold beyond this street, beyond this night. Ava took a small step back, creating space once more, not as distance, but as transition, her gaze steady as she spoke one final time. The truth does not need to raise its voice, Officer Brooks, it only needs the right moment. And as the flashing lights continued to pulse against the quiet street, that moment settled into place, not loud, not dramatic, but final in a way that could not be undone, because the night he thought he commanded had already written its own report, and now, all that remained was for him to face it. The night did not rush to end, it lingered, stretching the moment into something heavier than time itself, and as the agents continued their quiet work, the street transformed from a place of control into a place of record, every movement now part of something documented, something permanent. Officer Daniel Brooks stood near his patrol car, no longer at the center of the scene but within it. His presence observed rather than directing, he watched as one agent carefully reviewed a handheld device, another speaking in low, precise tones into an earpiece, their voices calm, measured, carrying no urgency because nothing here required it anymore. The outcome had already begun to take shape. Brooks shifted slightly, his hands resting at his sides, unsure where to place them now that authority no longer defined his posture. His gaze moved back to Ava Carter, who stood a few feet away. Composed as ever, her calm unchanged, but now it carried a different weight, not just presence, but conclusion. How long? Brooks asked quietly, the question almost lost in the low hum of engines and distant city noise. Ava looked at him, not surprised by the question, as if she had heard it many times before. Long enough, she answered, her voice steady. Long enough to understand patterns, not just moments. Brooks nodded faintly, absorbing the words even as they unsettled him, because patterns meant history, meant repetition, meant that this night was not an exception but part of something larger, something he had not fully seen until now. One of the agents approached, holding a tablet, its screen glowing softly in the dark. Ma'am, the timeline is complete, the agent said, turning the screen slightly so Ava could view it. Brooks caught a glimpse of timestamps, clips, fragments of interactions not just from tonight but from other nights, other stops, each one connected, each one building something he had never expected to face all at once. Ava studied the screen briefly, then nodded once, a small, decisive motion. Proceed, she said, and that single word carried finality, not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. The agent stepped back, continuing their work, while another moved toward Brooks, not aggressively, not confrontationally, just with purpose. Officer Brooks, we will need you to remain available for further review, the agent stated, tone neutral, procedural. Brooks met the agent's gaze, then looked back at Ava, searching for something, maybe explanation, maybe understanding, but What he found instead was clarity, the kind that did not soften reality but made it unmistakable. Ava took a slow breath, the cool night air steady around her, and spoke again, her voice calm but carrying a quiet gravity. "This is where it changes," she said, not just to him but to the moment itself. "Not because of punishment, but because of truth." Brooks felt those words settle deeper than anything before, because they did not accuse, they did not attack, they simply revealed, and revelation was harder to escape than judgment. The flashing lights from his patrol car continued to pulse. But now they felt different, less like a signal of control and more like a reminder, a constant reflection of a night that would not be forgotten. The agents began to close their devices, their movements signaling transition rather than conclusion, because this was not the end, it was the beginning of something that would extend far beyond this street, beyond this hour. Brooks remained still, the weight of the moment fully settled now, no longer shifting, no longer uncertain. Just present, and as Ava turned slightly, preparing to leave the scene she had never truly been a victim of, only a witness to, one final understanding lingered in the air, quiet but undeniable. The power he believed he carried had never been questioned before, because no one had forced him to see it, but tonight, under the same light he thought he controlled, it had been seen clearly for the first time, and it would not be unseen. The vehicles did not leave immediately, they remained for a moment longer as if allowing the night itself to settle into what had just happened, the engines idling softly, the faint glow of headlights stretching across the pavement like a quiet reminder that nothing here had been accidental. Ava Carter walked toward one of the dark SUVs, her pace steady, unhurried. Not because there was no urgency but because everything that needed to happen had already begun. Behind her the agents completed their final checks, closing devices, exchanging brief confirmations, their voices low and controlled, and one by one the doors of the vehicles opened again, not with force but with intention, as if each movement had already been written long before this night ever unfolded. Officer Daniel Brooks remained where he stood, near the edge of his patrol car's fading lights, watching the scene transition without him, no longer part of the control, no longer part of the direction, just a presence left behind in the aftermath of something he could not reverse. He glanced once more at the street around him, the same street that had felt empty now revealing itself as something entirely different, a place where silence had not meant absence but observation, where stillness had not meant safety but preparation, and for the first time he understood how easily a moment could be misunderstood when seen only from one side. Ava reached the open door of the SUV but paused just before stepping inside, not turning fully, just enough to acknowledge the space behind her, her voice carrying back through the quiet air, calm and even. "Moments like this are never isolated," she said, not loud, not directed at anyone in particular, but clear enough to be heard. "They are part of something larger, something that always leaves a record." Brooks listened, the words settling into him with a weight that did not need repetition, because now he could see it, not just this night but the shape of it, the way it connected, the way it revealed, the way it refused to stay hidden once it had been brought into the light. Ava stepped into the vehicle then, the door closing softly behind her, not a slam, not an end, just a quiet transition. One of the agents gave a small signal and the engine shifted, the vehicles beginning to move in a slow, coordinated departure, their headlights sweeping across the street one last time before fading into the distance, leaving behind only the dim glow of the street light and the intermittent flash of the patrol car that no longer felt the same. Brooks stood alone now, the silence returning but not as it had been before. This silence carried meaning, carried memory, carried the unmistakable presence of what had just unfolded. He looked down at his hands briefly, then back at the empty road ahead, and for a moment he did not move, because moving forward meant carrying this with him, meant stepping into whatever came next, and that was something he could no longer control. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, this time clear, steady. "Unit 27, confirm status," the voice asked, routine, unaware of the shift that had taken place. Brooks reached up slowly, pressing the button, his voice quieter than before but steady in a different way. "Status confirmed," he replied, and as the words left him, they felt different, not just a report of position, but an acknowledgement of change, because the night had not just passed, It had revealed something, and that revelation would not fade with the lights. It would remain, shaping everything that followed, long after the street returned to stillness. The street did not return to what it was, even after the engines faded and the lights disappeared into the distance. Something remained, something quiet but permanent. Officer Daniel Brooks stood beside his patrol car, the flashing lights now dimming as he reached inside and turned them off, and when the colors vanished, the darkness felt different, not empty, but honest. He leaned slightly against the door for a moment. His reflection faint in the glass, distorted by the angle, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to see it clearly, not the uniform, not the badge, but the choices, the tone, the assumptions that had shaped every second of what had just happened. The radio on his shoulder remained silent now, no more interruptions, no more instructions, just the low hum of the city in the distance, steady and indifferent. As if reminding him that the world continued regardless of what had shifted here, he took a slow breath, the cool air grounding him. But it did not erase the weight, it only made it sharper, more defined. He stepped away from the car, looking down the street where the vehicles had disappeared, and for a brief moment, he imagined how it must have looked from the other side, not as control, not as routine, but as something else entirely, something that carried meaning beyond the surface. Something that had been seen, recorded, understood. He reached up and adjusted his radio again, not because it needed fixing, but because the motion gave him something to do, something familiar, something that still belonged to him, but even that felt different now, less automatic, more deliberate, as if every small action carried more awareness than before. His mind replayed fragments of the interaction, not as he remembered them in the moment, but as they must have appeared, each word stripped of assumption, each pause filled with implication, and the more he thought about it, the clearer it became that the moment had never been just his to control. It had always been part of something larger, something that did not rely on his perspective to exist. He walked around to the front of the patrol car, resting his hands lightly on the hood, the metal still warm beneath his palms, a reminder of how recently everything had unfolded, and yet it already felt distant, not in time, but in understanding, because the version of himself who had stepped out of that car at the beginning of the night no longer fully existed, replaced by something more aware, more uncertain, but also more real. He straightened slowly, looking up at the flickering streetlight that had witnessed it all, its inconsistent glow now feeling almost symbolic, not stable, not perfect, but revealing in its own way. And as he stood there, alone in the quiet that followed, one thought settled in, steady and undeniable. The moment had ended, but its meaning had not, because what had been exposed here was not just an action, not just a decision, but a pattern. And patterns do not disappear when the lights go out, they follow, they echo, they remain, shaping everything that comes next. And for the first time, he understood that what mattered now was not what had happened, but what he would do with the fact that it had been seen. The engine of the patrol car came to life with a low, steady hum, breaking the silence that had settled over the street. But even that familiar sound did not feel the same. Officer Daniel Brooks sat behind the wheel for a moment before moving, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel as he stared through the windshield at the empty road ahead, the same road that had looked so ordinary before now carrying a weight he could not ignore. He shifted the car into drive slowly, pulling away from the curb with a controlled motion. Not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate, as if each movement required more awareness than it ever had before. The tires rolled over the pavement, passing beneath the flickering streetlight that had witnessed everything, and as he drove forward, the darkness ahead did not feel like something to move through, but something to think within. The radio remained quiet, no new calls, no distractions. Just the steady rhythm of the engine and the distant glow of city lights reflecting off the windshield. He glanced at the dashboard briefly, the digital clock marking the time, a simple detail that now felt significant, because it captured a moment that would not fade into routine. This was not just another shift, not just another stop, it was a line, a point where something changed. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, his fingers tightening slightly before relaxing again. And his mind returned to the words that had been spoken, not loudly, not forcefully, but clearly enough to stay. "This is about patterns." The phrase echoed, repeating itself in the quiet space of the car, and the more he thought about it, the more it reshaped everything he had believed about the night, because patterns were not accidents, they were choices repeated, habits formed, perspectives carried forward without question. He slowed as he approached an intersection, the traffic light ahead glowing red, casting a steady light across the empty cross street. He stopped, the car idling softly, and in that pause, the stillness returned, not the same stillness as before, but one filled with awareness. He looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror, his face illuminated faintly by the dashboard lights, and for a brief moment, he did not see certainty, he saw consideration, a quiet recognition that something had been revealed that could not be unseen. The light turned green, and he continued forward. The city gradually coming back into view, buildings rising, distant headlights moving, life continuing as it always did, but for him, the rhythm had shifted, every passing street, every quiet corner now carrying a subtle question, not imposed from the outside, but forming from within. He passed another intersection, another set of lights, and the repetition of the drive began to feel different, not automatic, not routine, but reflective, as if each mile offered space to understand what had happened rather than move past it. The uniform he wore, the badge at his chest, the role he had carried for years, all of it remained the same, but the meaning behind it had shifted, no longer just authority, but responsibility seen from a different angle. He exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible over the engine, and as he drove deeper into the city, one realization settled in with quiet certainty. The night had not taken anything from him, it had shown him something, and what he chose to do with that truth would define everything that followed. The city did not slow down for reflection, it moved the same way it always had, steady and indifferent, but inside the patrol car, everything felt altered. Officer Daniel Brooks drove through familiar streets that no longer felt entirely familiar, each passing storefront, each quiet block carrying a subtle weight that had not been there before. He stopped at another light, the red glow washing across the hood of his car. And this time he did not just wait, he listened, not to the radio, not to the outside noise, but to the silence within the moment, because that silence was no longer empty. It held questions, it held clarity, it held something he had spent years moving past without noticing. His hands rested on the wheel, steady but thoughtful, and his eyes shifted briefly to the side mirror, catching a glimpse of the road behind him, empty now, but not erased. Because what had happened back there was not something distance could undo, it was something that traveled with him. Something that would follow him into every interaction that came next. The light changed, and he moved forward again, the motion smooth, controlled, but no longer automatic, as if each action now required intention, as if each decision carried more weight than before. The radio crackled softly, a routine call coming through about a minor traffic issue a few blocks away. The kind of call he had responded to countless times without a second thought. He reached for the button, his hand pausing for just a fraction of a second before pressing it. "Unit 27 responding," he said, his voice steady, but different, quieter in tone, not lacking authority, but grounded in something more measured, something more aware. He turned onto another street, the headlights illuminating the pavement ahead, and as he approached the location, he noticed a car pulled over near the curb, hazard lights blinking softly, a driver standing nearby, waiting. Nothing unusual. Nothing urgent, just another moment, another interaction, but this time, it did not feel like routine, it felt like a choice. He slowed the patrol car, bringing it to a stop a short distance behind the vehicle, the engine idling as he sat there for a second longer than usual, not hesitating, but considering, because now he understood that every moment carried more than just action, it carried meaning. He stepped out of the car, the night air cool against his skin, and as his boots touched the pavement, he felt the difference immediately, not in the environment, but in himself, the way he stood, the way he looked at the situation, the way he allowed space for something other than assumption. He approached the driver, his voice calm, even. "Good evening, do you need assistance?" The words simple, direct, but shaped differently, not driven by suspicion, not framed by control, just an offer. The driver nodded, relief visible in their posture, and in that small exchange something shifted again, quieter this time, less dramatic, but just as real, because this was where change lived, not in the moment of exposure, but in the moments that followed, in the choices that redefined what came next. Brooks listened carefully as the driver explained the situation, his attention focused, not divided, not rushed, and for the first time that night, the interaction moved without tension, without imbalance. Just two people in a moment that did not need to escalate to exist, he nodded, offering a solution, his tone steady, respectful, and as he returned to his patrol car, the weight he carried had not disappeared, but it had shifted, no longer something pressing down, but something guiding forward. Something that would not be forgotten, because understanding does not erase the past, it reshapes the future, and as he sat behind the wheel once more, the realization settled in fully, not as a question, not as doubt, but as something clear and lasting. The badge did not define how he acted, his choices did, and now, those choices would be different. The night continued to unfold in quiet layers, not with dramatic turns but with subtle shifts that carried deeper meaning, and as Officer Daniel Brooks pulled away from the roadside after assisting the driver, the city lights ahead seemed less like routine markers and more like reflections of choices waiting to be made. He drove at a steady pace, not rushing to the next call, not drifting through the streets on instinct, but moving with intention, each block passing under his headlights like a moment to consider rather than ignore. The radio remained calm, occasional updates filtering through, but none of them urgent, none of them pulling him away from the awareness that had settled into him. He reached a wider avenue, the glow of storefront signs casting soft colors across the pavement, and for a moment, the normalcy of it all felt almost surreal, because nothing around him had changed. And yet everything within him had. He slowed at a crosswalk, watching as a pedestrian stepped forward, their pace unhurried, their presence simple, and as he waited, something small but significant registered. He was not just observing anymore, he was allowing space, allowing time, allowing the moment to exist without forcing it into something else. The pedestrian crossed, offering a brief nod, and Brooks returned it, a small exchange, quiet, almost invisible, but it carried a different kind of weight. The kind that did not demand attention but created understanding. He continued driving, the rhythm of the city gradually settling back into place, but now he could feel the difference in how he moved through it, not above it, not controlling it, but part of it, aware of the impact of every decision, every tone, every interaction. He turned onto a quieter street, the kind that often passed unnoticed during long shifts, but tonight, even this felt defined. The streetlights casting steady pools of light, the silence no longer empty but reflective. He parked briefly near the curb, not because he needed to, but because he wanted a moment to sit with what had changed. His hands rested loosely on the wheel, his gaze forward, but his mind moving through everything that had led here, not with resistance, not with denial, but with clarity. He thought about the words Ava Carter had spoken, about patterns, about truth, about the idea that what is unseen does not remain that way forever, and the more he considered it, the more he understood that accountability was not something imposed from the outside, it was something revealed from within, something that had always been there, waiting to be recognized. He leaned back slightly in his seat, taking a slow breath, the quiet inside the car steady and grounding, and in that stillness, there was no longer confusion, no longer uncertainty, just a clear understanding of what came next. Not a dramatic shift, not a sudden transformation, but a series of choices, deliberate and consistent, shaped by awareness rather than assumption. He started the engine again, the sound familiar but now carrying a different sense of purpose, and as he pulled back onto the road, the night no longer felt like something to get through, but something to move within with care, because now he understood that every moment mattered. Not just the ones that were seen, but especially the ones that were not, and as the city stretched out ahead of him, steady and unchanged, one truth remained clear: the difference between who he had been and who he would become would not be decided in one moment, but in every moment that followed. The night did not end with a siren or a report, it ended quietly, the way truth often does, settling into the spaces where noise used to live, and as Officer Daniel Brooks continued his patrol, the city moved around him unchanged, headlights passing, signals shifting, people moving through their own stories, unaware of the moment that had reshaped his. He drove through familiar streets that no longer felt automatic. Each turn measured, each stop intentional, not because the world demanded it, but because he now understood that every moment carried weight whether anyone was watching or not. The radio remained calm, routine calls flowing in and out, but his response to them had shifted, no longer driven by assumption, no longer shaped by unchecked patterns, but guided by something steadier, something earned through reflection. He slowed near another intersection, the glow of a street light casting a steady circle of light ahead, and as he paused there, he noticed something he had overlooked before. The way the light did not change what it touched, it revealed it, clearly, without judgment, without distortion, and in that simple realization, the entire night found its meaning, because what had happened was not about being stopped, not about being corrected, it was about being seen, fully, without the filters he had relied on for so long. He exhaled slowly, the weight no longer pressing down but settling into place, becoming part of him rather than something outside of him. He moved forward again, the patrol car rolling steadily through the quiet street, and as he did, the memory of Ava Carter did not fade. It remained, not as a figure of authority, not as a moment of consequence, but as a reminder, a reflection of what happens when truth stands still long enough to be recognized, her calm, her certainty, her refusal to react in the way he expected. All of it now clear in a way it had not been before, and for the first time, he understood that power had never been about control, it had always been about responsibility, about the ability to choose what to do when no one else is guiding the moment. The patrol car passed beneath another streetlight, then another, each one briefly illuminating the road ahead before fading behind him, and with each passing light, the path forward felt less uncertain, not because it was easy, but because it was clear. He adjusted his grip on the wheel, steady, grounded, and as the city stretched out before him, he did not rush through it, he moved within it, aware, present, accountable, and somewhere in that quiet, a final understanding settled, simple but lasting. He had worn the badge to define others, to decide, to control, but tonight had shown him something different, something he could not ignore, because in the end, the badge does not create justice, it reveals who is willing to carry it, and on that night, under a flickering streetlight, justice had already chosen its face.